And I think that it's we're at a different time. I think it's an interesting moment. We're a week from, or less than a week from a big presidential election in the United States, and it's not clear what delivers votes and why people vote, and do they vote because people tell them to vote. So I find it fascinating.
Well, I think there was a time there was a time in history when newspapers, they could be leaning, they could be left leaning, they could be right leaning, they could be conservative, they could be liberal. There could be lots of different. They could have lots of different political philosophy, but they also didn't feel like they were at risk to suffer retaliation. So, and they weren't necessarily, owned by the world's richest people or the world's richest hedge funds or the world's richest private equity firms. And so it was a little bit different world, when you're a public company, you have a gazillion shareholders. Right. So
but I think you have two different issues, right? You have one is sort of power and the role of a billionaire. And then you also have, do endorsements can anybody deliver votes? They're basically two different conversations.
I don't think it's about delivering votes. I don't think it was ever about delivering votes.
You're talking specifically about the non-endorsements at Washington Post and LA Times.
No. I'm just talking about, for starters, like you talked about, like you mentioned, like a Jimmy Hoffa, just as an example. That was about
the ultimate example.
Yeah, the ultimate example. That was about delivering votes, because that's,
for sure,
that's all that was about.
That's what he did, baby.
Yeah, a Teamsters union delivering votes. That was his job. An alderman in Chicago delivering votes.
But also a church leader, like a
church leader delivering votes. Absolutely. But when it comes to large media outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, whoever else it is, that's
Chicago Tribune,
right? Whatever. The Wall Street Journal. I don't look at any of those about delivering votes. I don't think that the Wall Street Journal delivers votes, but I think it is important for the Wall Street Journal to have an opinion. Like I hate when people don't have an opinion. I can't stand when people refuse to share their opinion on something because they're worried that it's going to make somebody upset. Oh, so sorry. Really sorry that I made you upset. And because you know what? That's not what having an opinion is all about. Like you've got to be able to accept that not everybody thinks the exact same way. And I think the Washington Post and the New York Times and the LA Times and the Wall Street Journal and whatever else it is should be able to have whatever opinions they want. And I don't think that is any part of that is about delivering votes. I think that's just about, hey, you know what? This is who we are. We're proud of it. And so your issue is not, so you're saying the whole focusing on the newspaper endorsements, because also, like, does Taylor Swift deliver votes, by the way? Does an endorsement from Hulk Hogan for Donald Trump, an endorsement from I mean, I'm not sure that an endorsement from Hulk Hogan means too much. I mean, Taylor Swift is a little bit different type of personality than Hulk Hogan by about 10,000 to 1, but I'm not sure Taylor Swift delivers that many votes. I mean,
but your point is Taylor Swift and Hulk Hogan should be free to say what they
think.
Of
course. If Hulk Hogan wants to endorse,
so should the Washington Post,
of course,
and so should the LA Times. So the real red flag that you're keying in on is the fact that there is fear of retribution for saying what you think is the alarming factor. It's not about delivering or not delivering.
Of course,
vote. It's about the fact that there's a fear of retribution for saying what you think. That's the issue.
Yeah, I mean, do I feel any differently about Hulk Hogan than I ever have, or Taylor Swift that I ever have, because one endorsed one candidate? Of course not. That's ridiculous. The idea that Hulk Hogan shouldn't be able to endorse whoever the hell he wants, of course he should. He's a wrestler, she's an artist. Do whatever you want. I don't care. I mean, same thing for a quarterback or, whatever it is. I don't care. If you don't want to, you don't. I don't. That's also your choice. But I think this discussion today started around the whole Washington Post and Bezos and all that kind of stuff. And Bezos, to me, really copped out with his op-ed. Was the lamest. I basically lost all respect for Bezos.
I agree.
When he copped out with saying something to the effect of the hard truth, Americans don't trust the news media. What a freaking cop-out. Like his whole response is, well,
and he blames Americans.
Exactly.
Blame Americans?
Exactly. How does he blame Americans? For a guy that's basically got his paws into every single person's world in America. Every single person in America pays him a tax. And the idea that he thinks that, you know what? I'm not going to make a difference anyway, so we're not going to do something. He is absolutely.
And he's also a smart guy. Like he's not an idiot. So
how could he be an idiot? How could he possibly be an idiot?
He's going to treat us like we're idiots.
Exactly.
Obviously, bro. Obviously, you're not endorsing because you are terrified that Donald Trump will win and pull all of your space contracts and run the DOJ at you. Like, it's obvious. Bezos said, do not endorse, because if Trump wins and we endorse Harris, Trump is going to weaponize the DOJ, the DOD, the DHS, the NIH.
Of course.
And he's going to make our lives a living hell. FCC.
Trump. Bezos is lame and pathetic. And that was the worst op-ed, and I read it. It was the worst op-ed ever, and he should just crawl in a hole and be embarrassed. Because I've always like really respected him until that moment. Like that is the moment. Like that is just disgusting.
But you know what would have been an amazing op-ed as in an alternative universe is if he said, listen, I requested no endorsement at the Washington Post because I have credible reasons to be afraid that my personal and my business interests are at grave risk if I don't endorse Donald Trump and he wins. I'm confident that he will attack me directly.
But that is an endorsement for the other side. I mean, that's
the reason he's not endorsing.
I know, but that's almost worse than. That yes, he could have said that, but that's almost worse. The thing with Trump, though, is Trump doesn't actually do anything. He's just all talk. I mean, it's nothing. He's not going to do anything. He needs, in order for the American economy to move forward, in order for Trump to be successful, if he does win,
he's going to torpedo Amazon.
He needs Amazon more. He needs just about any other company in America. If you're the CEO of a major company and you're scared of who's the president, get a life. Just quit your job and go live on an island somewhere. Just get something else. Be who you are. If you can't be who you are, it's absolutely pathetic. You can be. The great thing about this country is, you don't have to like somebody. You could think he's the biggest jerk in the world, but life goes on. No big deal. Still going to wake up Thursday morning and run your business. Nothing's going to change.
I want to try this a different way.
Okay.
I got a different way at this. The problem with this is it's many ways predicated on my opinion, but I believe my opinion is very credible in this matter.
Okay. At least Dylan Ratigan, I don't think, is scared to give his opinion.
I have a strong view.
Even though it's only on Tasty, I think, it's okay.
I like my opinion.
Okay.
I believe Donald Trump is extremely popular because not because of anything that he says or does, although some people might like some things that he says or does, but because there's so much disgust and dissatisfaction going back decades with what is perceived to be the political establishment. This could include George W. Bush. This can include Barack Obama. This can include Bill Clinton. And that Trump basically is but a lot of the Trump voters are not voting for Trump because they have some grand love of Donald Trump, so much as Donald Trump is like giving the political establishment the middle finger. It's like a FU to the entire political system. Like, you think you're so smart with your little schemes and your little Democrats and your little Republicans and your little committees and your little whatever. Well, here is one of the biggest, loudest, most lyingest con men in history as a giant FU to the protocol, the decorum, the sort of pretext that there's a underlying resentment for the totality of what is perceived to be both the political establishment and the media establishment. It's why Tasty exists, right? Tasty is a renegade media organization against institutional financial media, or all the podcasts. Joe Rogan is an insurgent against them, whatever. It goes on and on. My point is there's appetite for resentment and disgust for the establishment. And that piece of this, I think, gets lost where people say, oh, how can you be voting for Donald Trump? so many people that are actually voting for Donald Trump are not doing it because they like Donald Trump, although some of them certainly do, so much as it is they're doing it out of disgust for the what they perceive to be institutional power, whether it's legacy media or legacy government. And so the irony, I think, of the Washington Post decision specifically is that it actually it takes an organization being institutional media that was already sort of fragile in terms of its credibility with younger people anyway, and only reduces its credibility. My point is an act that they think their whole premise that, oh, well, we're not endorsing because we would like to restore our trust, the American people, like the whole baloney from the Bezos op-ed we were just talking about, when in fact, it's the action that Bezos is taking only further destroys the credibility of the media. Right now, you clearly are just a billionaire who will do whatever you think is necessary to protect your self-interest. And there is no truth, or there is no morals. There is no point of view that is beyond what is convenient at that moment.
I pretty much agree with you on everything that you just said. I think, though, this is a tipping point moment for Bezos. And I think he's going to reflect back on this in whether it's in 3 months or 3 years, whatever, in a relatively short period of time. And he's going to say this was the dumbest thing he's ever done. And because he was very short-sighted, and whether or not endorsing the person or supporting the endorsement, like what he did was he's basically a team owner that just lost the support of his entire team because he essentially threw him under the bus. And you know what? Then don't own the paper, sell the paper.
But he also lost his audience.
Yeah, he lost 10%.
He lost his staff. He lost the fan base.
Yeah,
He lost the player.
Yeah, everything. But it's just like I feel like he didn't do this.
You got to sell the paper.
I think that when he did this and he went in on the meeting and said, we're not going to go through with this endorsement, we're not going to do the endorsement, that he didn't think I just don't think he thought it was going to be as big as it actually was. And I think this thing blew up in his face and he regrets it. And he knows he's too smart not to realize how stupid a move this was. And he's too smart now not to realize that this thing is 100 times worse than for him than just put it. He could have just done the endorsement because Trump already knew the Washington Post was going to endorse Kamala. It doesn't even matter. Like he's not Trump's probably more surprised that he went through this than if he had just endorsed. He's like, he never thought he was getting the endorsement of the Washington Post. So who cares? He's smart enough not to expect it. So like, it's not a surprise, I think he was more surprised that like Joe Rogan didn't come out and say, I support you, that kind of thing. I
agree.
I think the Washington Post not supporting him. I mean, he hasn't, he's always ripped on the Washington Post.
But let's work through this just for the pleasure of the intellectual exercise on the assumption that Jeff Bezos is highly intelligent, multi-level thinker.
Well, how can you have how can you assume anything else about Jeff Bezos?
Assume anything else,
He's a genius or a business genius, whatever you want to say, one of the greatest that ever lived. No question about it.
He's a good decision maker
Of course. You can't, it's not even up for debate. He's in the top five greatest entrepreneurs of all time.
Which we'll reinterpret for purposes of this discussion as one of the top 5 greatest decision makers of all time.
Sure.
Hire, fire, budget, whatever the decision is. Make the decision. At the same time, let's characterize the decision. Forget for the Washington Post, who obviously is in favor of Kamala Harris.
Sure.
To your point, like it's been saying this since
it doesn't even matter. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But the point is, it's self-evident. You don't even. It's not like by not endorsing that all of a sudden he's like, oh, I think maybe everything they wrote the last 10 years they didn't mean it. Like no one thinks that.
No. This actually helps. This actually helps Kamala more than them endorse them.
I agree with that.
The Washington Post endorsing Kamala Harris doesn't really get anybody else to change their vote or go out, whatever.
But the world's richest man, or one of the world's richest men, being afraid of Donald Trump,
exactly, makes people go, "F you, we're going to go vote." 100%.
Maybe Trump is really dangerous. If the world's 100%. Richest man who has a spaceship and a this and
100%.
a movie studio.
Yep, no doubt about it.
The world's biggest boat, and he's the biggest decision maker, and he's Mr. Man. Mr. Jeff Bezos is king of the world, or one of them, whatever, right? And if the king of the world is so afraid of Donald Trump retaliation that he refuses to do the obvious thing, which is let the liberal newspaper that he owns, that's already done this for the last 10 years, not do it, maybe Donald Trump is more dangerous than we thought. So I guess where I'm going to, Tom, is this. Either Jeff Bezos made a stupid decision, which even the best decision makers can do, or Donald Trump is vastly more dangerous than most people realize, and Jeff Bezos knows that, and other people don't realize it. Those are the only two possible explanations, in my view, assuming basic competence from Bezos, which is a reasonable assumption, is either bad decision, a rare and terrible decision from a great decision maker, or he knows something about the danger of Trump that other people don't perceive.
The thing with this is a horrible decision. As much as I hate Trump, it's the danger of Trump is not what scares me at all. This is a horrible decision. This is a horrible decision by Bezos. And this has nothing.
Based on what? Why did the world's biggest?
This has nothing.
Why did one of the world's best decision makers make such a dumb ass decision?
Because occasionally people that make lots of decisions make some bad decisions. And Jeff Bezos made a bad decision. And he's going to.
When you have to make a million decisions once in a while.
Yeah. Once in a while, you're going to make a bad decision. I mean, he's probably made some horrible acquisitions over the years. Sure. Sure. This is just another bad decision. Now, on balance, he's third richest man in the world. He's going to be just fine. And he's made a lot of incredible decisions, obviously. But this is just a bad decision, and he screwed up. And this has nothing to do with Trump. It wasn't his. He had nothing to do with this. This is just a bad decision. He made a business decision. It was a bad decision. He's going to regret it for the rest of his life, and it's going to make him look very small, and he's going to lose a lot of respect, not just 200,000 subscribers. He's going to lose a lot of people on a lot of his different.
Just his status as a great man has been.
Yes, of course. It is a one of the dumbest decisions. Sometimes these guys, these rich, crazy billionaires, they step outside their lane. Just like, Musk buying Twitter was a dumb decision. Musk is going to be the richest person in the world, or he already is the richest person in the world. You're allowed to make bad decisions. Like it's totally cool,
But also sometimes when you play that big and you've won that big, when you make bad decisions, you also make big bad decisions just because your scale of decision making.
Sure. And sometimes it's money. Like in the case of Twitter, it's actual dollars. In the case of Bezos here, it's reputation and more than that. But it's okay for these for the super mega billionaires. These are a different class of billionaire. It's okay for them to screw up because they make a lot of decisions, and the ones that they screw up on are going to get a little bit blown up, and it's going to come back and haunt them, and that's totally fine. Yeah, this is
the alternative version is Donald Trump is more dangerous than you think.
I don't
dangerous that he's scared. So
I don't think that is. I actually don't think that's the case.
He scares Jeff Bezos.
I don't think that's the case. I really don't. I just think that if you believe like I do in free markets and marketplace efficiency and you believe that nobody's bigger than this country, there's no chance. And we have enough checks and balances in place. I don't worry about that. I mean, I think there's obviously little pockets of concern, but on the big picture, I don't worry about that. I think that the bigger concern here is if it can happen to the Washington Post, and it can happen obviously in other places, podcasters that don't want to endorse somebody either, because if they endorse somebody, then they won't get another person to come onto their show type of thing. Then you're only going to have, Kamala did go on Fox, Trump has gone on some other networks, but the reality is if you're only going to be on friendly, media outlets, and if you're only going to talk to friendly podcasters, then have we gotten to the point where everybody's going to be scared to, to endorse people. Everybody's going to be, for fear that they're going to lose half their audience. Are you going to be fearful that, you can only go on, podcasts where somebody throws up a softball? Are you only going to go onto networks where the hosts are basically, paid to just ask stupid softball-like questions? What happened to the tough question?
Mike Wallace died a long time ago. I mean,
what happened to the great journalists?
I can tell you, I can answer that question, which is that the editorial owners of the news organizations started pandering to the guests because acquiring the guests was a mechanism. So when the economics of the media business started to degrade in the era of the digital, let's say in the late 90s, when the digital started to sort of just chew on the margins across the whole thing, and when profitability became a much more of a direct derivative of clickability as opposed to sponsorship or subscribers, like in the sort of 70s or 80s or 90s version of a newspaper or whatever, that the newsrooms shifted from acquiring money by acquiring the trust of their readers to acquiring money by acquiring people's attention short term by virtue of pandering to the most clickable guests. And running an organization that caters to the most clickable guests is different than running an organization that holds itself out as the most like Mike Wallace and 60 Minutes are appealing to our generation because they represent this period it was a real period in the 70s, 80s, and 90s where you were a more powerful news organization because you had a stronger buy-in from your audience that you were telling the truth. And that's why would people go on with Mike why would you take an interview with Mike Wallace even if you knew Mike Wallace was going to chew your balls off, excuse my language, is because you knew that it was worse for you to avoid Mike Wallace.
I like that.
And so you're like, I got to go sit with Mike Wallace and take my lumps because if I do, I stand a chance, and if I don't, I'm finished. And then the world changed to I can avoid Mike Wallace my entire life and I'll only go with friendlies. And it's all, or the Obamas even I'll just invent my own media organization, right? Obama was the first one to basically say, I don't need to talk to anyone. I'll just do my own content and my own programming over the top and just program my own channel, my own mess. And Trump is also the king of that, right? And so what we've transitioned from, we went from you got to talk to Mike Wallace or the editor of the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, whoever, to I'll go to friendlies where it's clickable, to I'll just program my own content directly and won't do interviews. I actually think that is very bad, obviously. I mean, that's not a surprise that I think that that's bad, but I think that's dangerous. But it also makes that's why the Bezos endorsement doesn't really matter. The Bezos endorsement only matters insofar as it matters for Jeff Bezos, who's made a fool of himself.
Yeah, that's it.
But if anything, it's an asset for Harris. And maybe it's an indication of how dangerous Trump is, although that is, I just more debatable.
Yeah, I'm not. That's.
I'm just saying those are the only possible interpretations.
Sure, it's an interesting twist in 2024.
I mean, it's interesting because I think Joe Rogan wants to position himself as the new Mike Wallace. Which is preposterous.
It's preposterous because A, he's incredibly stupid, and B, he refuses. He's gutless. The one thing I cannot.
He's definitively non-confrontational. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, I call that gutless because if you want to be a great podcaster and you want to be a great interviewer, you've got to be able to ask the tough questions. You cannot give everybody. The reason I know a lot of people like Rogan. I know 40 million people watch the Trump interview, whatever it is. But the problem with Rogan, going back to where he never asks, he's non-confrontational. He never asks the tough question. He never calls somebody out on he didn't call Trump out at all on January 6th. He didn't call him out on any of his lies. It's just ridiculous, man. Give yourself some credibility. Even if you don't even believe, just say it. Just act like it. Just fake it.
But I would say it's the same thing, but I would say because I would say the most comparable podcast, and it's not really comparable, but the closest thing for Harris would be the podcast she did with Call Her Daddy. There's that female, that woman, I forget her name, but there's it's a big multi-million person, like a big audience. But again, same thing, like that woman, non-confrontational. Like the point is that you've come to an era where the people that do the interviews,
which is weird because normally she asks really good questions. Like
call her daddy girl, you're saying.
Yeah, call her daddy. Yeah, that podcast, she does ask tough questions, but not to Kamala.
And that's why people don't trust the media in general, because they're like, oh, okay, if you want to have a Harris interview, you have to basically sign it. So years ago, my first decade of my career as a journalist was for Bloomberg, which was subscriber based. And Matt Winkler, who was the editor in chief, I would say is one of the last of the sort of Mike Wallace type journalists, where like if a CEO of an investment bank decides that they're like, oh, I want to do an interview with Tom instead of Dylan. Like, so that's just the editor, the editor in chief of Bloomberg would say, no, the CEO doesn't decide who interviews him. Bloomberg decides who interviews him, and Dylan is my guy. Dylan will ask the questions. I don't care that he's friends with Tom. I'm not going to let Tom interview him, which is different than if you were at CNBC. If the CEO is friends with Maria, then Maria will do the interview because the CEO likes Maria. And that's true for all the cable news outlets across the board, right?
The only person I know that's interviewed both candidates that I can think of is Stern, but he hasn't interviewed Trump. Like this time, they haven't probably talked in like 8 years. But the old Trump interviews on Stern are great. Before he was a political candidate, they're great because they're funny.
Because Howard will ask questions.
Yeah, he asks questions like, you have 3 kids. There's only 2 spots on the rowboat. Which kid are you throwing overboard? And Trump would answer the question. Amazingly, would answer the question, and it was funny. Like he was funny. He gave.
Well, the answer was obviously Eric. I mean, that was true the whole time.
It was just, those interviews are classic because Howard threw stuff at Trump and Trump answered every single question, and they were funny answers, and it was a really good conversation. He won't do that anymore, but that's, that was back in the day. But Stern also interviewed Kamala, and he does these long form interviews, and that was a really good interview too. I mean, he asked much tougher questions than anybody else.
I mean, the interviews now, I really think there's such a deal between Rogan and Trump, or call her daddy girl and Harris before the interview, where it's like, okay, Tom, I'm going to interview you, but I won't ask you about trading losses. I'll never ask you about losing trades, or I'll never ask you about wide spreads and illiquid names, like some set of rules for things that you don't want to do. One of the greatest joys of my life, and the reason I've been so proud and happy to work with and for this organization for so long, is because you're like, okay, Radigan, I will actually pay you to ask me the miserable questions. I mean, we haven't done much of it in recent years because it's been sort of well established. But my point is that is the whole point, is that it's like, what about the widespreads? What about the taxes?
Yeah, we don't. We have a rule,
and you have no issue with that. But my point is that that's not what's happening in our American politics. Sorry.
Every time I go to do an interview or talk to somebody about this podcast, now they're always financial, but first thing I say is nothing's off limits. Because a lot of people say to me, what's off limits? Or do you want to see the questions ahead of time? I'm like, no. A, I don't want to see the questions ahead of time. And B, nothing's off limits. If I don't want to answer it, I won't answer it. But don't just ask me anything you want. I've never had a single question that I didn't want to answer. Never one.
And if you don't want to answer the question, you would say, "I'm not going to answer that." Okay, like it's such a. But the interesting thing about what you just said, which is an indication of how the media has degraded so profoundly, is the fact that they ask you, "Would you like to see the questions before the interview?" Which in the old Mike Wallace or even old Matt Winkler world of journalism, you would never give you don't give the financial CEO or any CEO or any political, you just say, you want to come on television and you want to talk about your brokerage firm, or you want to talk about your philosophy for the future of,
the world's changed. If you're interviewing,
and I'm not going to give you my questions. I'm saying, you are party boy here. You got your big brokerage. You want to tell everybody how it is. Come talk to me and let's find out. And then and the Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal or whatever, or Mike Wallace is not going to give you an advance of the questions. It's why no one believes the media anymore. And it's why Joe Rogan is a joke. It's why it's why all these interviews, it's why people are so disgusted with the entire infrastructure, with the cherry on top being Jeff Bezos refusing to do the most obvious endorsement of the entire political season, which is Washington Post for Kamala Harris. Come on.
Yeah. Well, listen, That's the era that we're in. It's okay.
Is it? Is it okay? I don't know if it is okay.
I should have said that. These are the things that we can't control. We can talk about it. We have no say in it. We can talk about it, but it's the kind of thing it is okay, because what Bezos did is going to completely turn the tide, and everybody else is going to take a much more opinionated going forward, because they are not going to want the feedback, the crush that Bezos is going to get. Nobody's ever going to want that wrath anymore. They're not going to want that. So they're going to go full boat.
I agree.
I think
his op-ed trying to explain it away made it worse.
Oh, way worse. I read the op-ed. I was like, you got to be kidding me.
Right. It gets better. First of all, you don't endorse it. Now you're going to try to come with some explanation.
Already it's happening. Other papers, the main paper in Seattle, I think it's Seattle Post. I'm not sure what it is. Seattle Times, Seattle Post, whatever it is. They've already come out. Their headline was, "Hell yeah, we're going to endorse." Everybody's jumping on this now. I'm sure the New York Post will jump on it tomorrow.
Philadelphia paper, same thing. Philadelphia's newspaper was like,
please, you're embarrassing because they embarrassed everybody. And if the Washington Post, they didn't hurt Trump, they didn't hurt Kamala, they embarrassed themselves, and everybody's gonna take advantage of that.
And it's one thing if, like you said, if Taylor Swift wants to endorse the president, she can do it.
Of course.
She can not do it. Who cares? But if Taylor Swift decides not to make an endorsement, who cares?
Sure. Jordan never made an endorsement. Jordan never made an endorsement, which used to bother.
If you're the Washington Post, which holds this sort of unique location in global journalism as the paper of record for the city of record for the most powerful government in the history of the earth. Come on. I mean, you make an idiot. That's why I'm saying maybe Trump is more dangerous. I find it difficult to believe that Bezos could make such an idiotic decision, considering the obvious fact the man is not an idiot.
Happens.
Or Trump is really dangerous.
Yeah, that's just a bad decision. This is a bad decision.
But he's compounding the bad decision.
Yeah, I know. Well, he tried to get out of it. Listen, this is what you do. You just make the situation worse. He's not the first guy ever to make a bad decision and then make the decision worse. Dig his hole deeper. Okay, this is not the first time in history we've seen this. Okay, this is
a well-traveled path by the by the male species.
Yes, by the dominant male, the alpha male.
The alpha male who makes a bad decision only to make more bad decisions that make it worse is basically
trying to work his way out of the first bad decision. He destroys, 15 or 20 years of goodwill. Yeah, I understand that.